Hello, I'm James Holland, and I hope you won't mind me mentioning my new book, Sicily 43, which is out now. The campaign remains an often forgotten one, yet, as I discovered, the 38-day battle for Sicily is an extraordinary and complete story, and one that involves breathtaking action at sea, in the air, and on land. Its conquest involved the largest airborne operations ever witnessed up to that point. Daring raids by special forces, the harnessing of the mafia, attacks across mosquito-infested plains, assaults up almost sheer faces of rock and scrub, and featured an astonishing array of highly colourful characters. It was a period in which fascism was overthrown in Italy, Mussolini was toppled, and in which the pattern for the rest of the war in the West was set. As I was writing it, I was swept away by the incredible human drama and by the relentless heat, dust, mosquitoes and the brutal terrain. There's a special edition with extra content at waterstones.com, but you can also get it at Amazon, an array of supermarkets or any of those brilliant independents that are dotted around the country. Thank you for listening, and ciao for now.
Actung. Well, hello everyone, it's James Holland here, and I've gone a little bit rogue. I've left Al back down in London, and I've headed north, and I'm currently right on the North Nottinghamshire, South Yorkshire border. And it's quite odd really, because this is the day before my new book on Sicily is published, yet it's also the kind of first proper day of going out into the field to research the next book, which is going to be called Brothers in Arms, and which is about the Sherwood Rangers yeomanry. Actually, it was inspired by one of the guests we had on not long ago, John Orloff, one of the writers of Band of Brothers, and it kind of got me thinking about that and the fact that Band of Brothers was such an iconic book when it first came out, and obviously has been that amazing TV series as well, which everyone loves, I mean, not least me. But it made me think it would be good to do a kind of very human drama-led, sort of elegiac account of one particular unit. And the Sherwood Rangers yeomanry is a British Army unit that I'm particularly associated with, not least because I'm very good friends with David Christopherson, who was the son of Stanley Christopherson, who took over command of the Sherwood Rangers just a few days after D-Day and was still in command right at the end of the war. And some years ago I edited his diaries and got to interview lots of survivors, and those of you who've been listening to Pod may remember that not so long ago I went to see Stan Perry, who's the last surviving officer of the Sherwood Rangers, and interviewed him at some length, and fascinating that was too. But I'm up here today because I'm going to Thoresby, which is where the Regimental Museum is and where they have their archives, see what they've got. Go and talk to Steve Cox, who's the curator there. But I've also come up here to see Jonathan Hunt, who is the honorary colonel of the Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry, which still has a TA unit. And we're trying to solve one of those historical dilemmas which occurs every so often, and this is about D-Day, and it's about the issue of timing, because there are even when you look at primary sources such as battalion war diaries and regimental diaries, often there's discrepancies, and we're trying to unravel a discrepancy about the timing of when the Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry landed on D-Day. Now, they were there as part of 8th Armoured Brigade, part of 50th Division, landing on Gold Beach, and they were supporting 231 Malta Brigade, which had the Hampshires, Dorsets and Devons. So kind of local regiments to me, really, down where I live, down in Wiltshire. And there does seem to be a problem, an issue, over exactly when they landed. And this is something that I'm very, very keen indeed to try and straighten out. Right, so I'm now with Jonathan Hunt, who commanded the squadron, Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry Squadron, back in 1980, weren't you? You were commanding that in Cold War exercises in Germany.
I was.
But also a historian of the regiment, so a very useful person for me to talk to as I'm beginning my own history and own research into what happened to the Sherwood Rangers from D-Day onwards. And on D-Day, there is this big debate really about timings and who was where and when. So to just summarise this, the Sherwood Rangers were 8th Armoured Brigade, which was an independent armoured brigade. So they were then attached to various divisions, and certainly on D-Day and the first part of the Normandy campaign, to 50th Division. And 50th Division was landing in two distinct areas, but the one that was furthest west on Gold Beach was around Le Hamel and Asnel, which is just to the east of Arromanches, famous later because of the Mulberry Harbour and all the rest of it. And they were supposed to land on a section of the beach called Jig Green, with the Sherwood Rangers there to support. But actually, most of the infantry, the Dorsets and the Hampshires, the 1st Dorsets and the 1st Hampshires, A and B companies in both battalions, landed, about a mile further east, Jonathan?
Yes.
On Jig Red. And This is a problem because Jig Red has very sort of clay, soft sand there and isn't suitable for armour.
Correct.
So they're supported by Averies, which is the Armoured Vehicles Royal Engineers. So this is the flail tanks and mine clearers and all the rest of it, and bunker busters and so on. So they've got those supporting them, and they've got the Sherwood Rangers. And the big dispute is over the fact that according to the 231st Malta Brigade, to which the Hampshires and the Dorsets and indeed the Devons all belong, they didn't see the Sherwood Rangers. So they felt that they weren't being supported by the tanks. So the suggestion is that the Sherwood Rangers landed a lot later than they claim to have landed. That is basically the nub of the dispute.
That's right.
However, we think they've got that wrong, don't we? And this just goes to show, though, how difficult it can be sometimes to kind of wade your way through primary sources which are contradictory and conflicting. And so what we've got here is the war diary of the 231st Infantry Brigade headquarters. This is a document that anyone can go and look at the National Archives in Kew. And the key bit of evidence here is 0640. And it says the 8 LCTs, this is landing craft tanks carrying the DD tanks. This is the Sherwood Rangers, the special swimming tanks, because 2 squadrons, B and C squadron of the Sherwood Rangers, were equipped with DD tanks. Having just returned through failure to float the tanks, is passing us going seawards, i.e. away from the shore. They're turning back. There is the sound of the most terrific fire, which continues unceasingly. And that is where the whole dispute has started from, followed by the fact that once you've got these guys, these infantry are actually on the beach, they're reporting that they haven't seen any tanks. But you're going to unpick this for me, aren't you, Jonathan?
Yes, I mean, the whole thing is that that the Sherwood Rangers say and did land on Gold Jig Green.
So this is further west from Jig Red.
And further west than Jig Red, and the bit of the beach that 231 Brigade was supposed to land on, but didn't. So, in fact, the Sherwood Rangers' story is that they landed where they should have landed at the time that they should have landed, and found themselves on the beach with no infantry support to attack and take out the defences ahead of them.
And you know, you've been there a zillion times, I've been there a zillion times. There's that bunker there, isn't there, at Le Hamel. So for those of you who haven't been to Gold Beach, the westernmost part of Gold Beach, or rather I should say Jig Green, that section of the beach, is around this little hamlet called Le Hamel.
Yes.
And you can go and stand there on the kind of sort of, on the sea wall.
Yes.
Overlooking the beach is this bunker, which did have, I think, it's either a 50mm or a 75mm gun, an anti-tank gun. I can't remember which one it was. But anyway, it sat there. And there it is. And that is a big problem if you're landing without infantry, because armour and infantry needs to operate together, so that you've got the infantry being the eyes on the ground and the armour supplying the fire support.
Yes, because the other element that was supposed to land as a package with the brigade were the engineers with their funnies of flail tanks. And,
this is the Averies.
yes, and the Averies and so forth. And they definitely also, their war diary says that they did land on red, not green.
Jig Red, just to remind you, is
Exactly.
further east.
Further east. So the infantry and the engineers were not on the section of the beach where they had intended to land. They were further east. But the Sherwood Rangers landing craft had launched the Sherwood Rangers in the right place, and the Sherwood Rangers were on that bit of the beach, and on their own, basically, without the equipment to take out the gun emplacement, and they were losing tanks. There were 32 amphibious tanks landed.
So that's two squadrons of 16.
Yes, 2 squadrons of 16.
These are all DD tanks.
Yes, and they lost, I can't remember the exact numbers, but they lost 7 swimming in, roughly equally from each squadron, and they lost another 6 or so on the beach, knocked out by this gun that was enfilading the beach,
right?
i.e. shooting along the beach.
And that's the bunker you can still see to this day.
To this day. And so they were held up on the beach, and everything was held up behind them.
Right.
And they were rescued in the end by the good old gunners. I mean, whoever is deliberately polite about the gunners, but on this occasion we really had to be, because they were the gunner regiment, the Essex Yeomanry, the gunner regiment that was supporting the Sherwood Rangers, and one of their guns, big guns, had landed, and he charged the position and managed to get around through the aperture of this emplacement and knocked the gun out, that's the thing that freed the Sherwood Rangers then to get off the beach.
I must just tell you that the first time I ever went there was 2004, which of course was the 60th anniversary of D-Day. And I was with my great mate David Christopherson. And he was saying, this is where they all landed, and my dad came ashore, and they had this terrible problem with this gunner. And he said, and then this chap from the Essex Yeomanry came along and did this shot and saved him. And there was this little chap standing next to him in a blazer with his beret on with medals, and he went, "That was me." And David went, "Good gracious, I don't believe it." And he said, "Yeah, that was me. I did that shot." It was absolutely brilliant. So if the infantry, if the First Hampshires and First Dorsets are landing on Jig Red, what are we talking about distance-wise? From where the Sherwood Rangers are landing on Jig Green? About a mile? Something like that?
Yes.
3/4 mile?
A Gold Beach, all these beaches, which were the same dimensions, they were about 4 miles wide.
Right.
And they were divided into 2 sectors which had code names, and the right-hand sector of Gold was called Jig, and the left-hand sector was called King.
As you're attacking it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then each of those sectors were 2 miles.
So King is where the green houses is.
Yes, exactly. And so each of those sectors are 2 miles wide.
Yeah.
And what was supposed to happen was a battalion, supported by a squadron of tanks, was supposed to land in each half of Jig,
right,
and another in each half of King.
Got
so
you.
So
you've got Jig Green, Jig Red,
Jig Green, Jig Red,
King Green, King Red. Yeah.
But in the case of the right-hand sector, Jig, the reconnaissance before the day had found this clay on Jig Red, which made it unusable for armour, and therefore the whole of 231 Brigade was redirected to land on Jig Green.
Got you.
And that would have been a mile wide. So if the brigade actually landed on Jig Red with its right flank on the boundary between Jig Red and Jig Green, it was effectively a whole mile to the east of where it should have been.
So we've got sort of, but
there's no disputing the fact that the Hampshires and the Dorsets, when they land, can't see the Sherwood Rangers. They can't see anyone. As far as they're concerned, they're landing with a few Averies, which are getting bogged down.
Correct.
And otherwise they're on their own.
And they're up to a mile apart. That's the point.
Well, so the point is, I mean, I think that is very, very easily explained because, first of all, you've got very, very low cloud.
Yes.
A mizzle. So you've got low visibility anyway.
The fog of war.
And you've got huge amounts of smoke.
Yeah.
And you've got sort of rough surf.
Yes.
And you're getting off that beach and you're not going to be sort of looking around going, where the hell are the Sherwood Rangers? Well, you might be thinking, where's my fire support? But you're not going to be sort of pausing with your binoculars, are you?
Fire. The Hampshires were furiously under fire.
Yeah.
I mean, they suffered huge casualties. This is one of the other features. Both their point battalions, the commanding officers were either killed or wounded.
Yes, they are, yeah.
And their seconds in command, one of the seconds in command as well. And when that kind of thing happens, and company commanders, when that sort of thing happens, you cannot think that any military formation doesn't stop and have to regroup itself because somebody else has to take command and direction and so forth, and so the momentum is lost and the focus is lost. And the same thing happened to the assault engineers. The squadron leader of he was killed.
Yes, so their whole leadership is effectively decapitated, isn't it? But a mile is quite a long distance, and with smoke and low cloud and the fog of war and all the rest of it, are you going to be able to see a Sherwood Ranger Sherman from a mile away? I would suggest possibly not. And certainly not clearly. You're not going. You might if you kind of paused and you got out your binos.
If you've ever been racing at Newmarket and you looked at the straight mile and a quarter, and a field of 30 or 40 horses down at the start is a dot.
Right. Okay. So that Sherman's a big old thing, but it's not that big. So that explains why the infantry can't see the Sherwood Rangers, because the Sherwood Rangers have landed where they're supposed to at La Hamel, and the infantry of the Hampshire and the Dorsets have landed a mile away at least, further to the east, where they're surrounded by smoke and the fog of war and all the rest of it. But we've still got this war diary that says 0640, the 8 LCTs carrying the DD tanks, having just returned through failure to float the tanks, i.e. they're passing seawards. So we've got to explain why this is in the war diary for 231 Malta Brigade, saying that 8 LCTs are turning back to the sea, towards the main, they're going out to sea rather than to land, with the Shermans on board.
And I have no idea what they were looking at, but what I do think is when you look at the overall picture of D-Day, Omaha Beach, which is the Americans' beach to the west of Gold.
It's about 6 miles from Gold Beach, isn't it? It is. 5 or 6 miles.
But the coast curves, and therefore if you were steaming into Omaha from 6 miles out, which is what the DD tanks on Omaha did, they launched at 6,000 yards, not 6 miles, 3 miles, then you're going to have other people's LCTs in the vicinity of that many miles out to sea, and therefore it's perfectly possible what they saw was something else, not the Sherwood Rangers ones.
I mean, the bottom line is it can't be the Sherwood Rangers returning to sea, because we know that 7 sink and that the rest do get ashore.
Yes.
So regardless of what time they get ashore, they can't get ashore at all if they're returning to sea. Exactly. So that clears that one. But there is another bit of evidence which I think is really, really conclusive, and this is an aerial photograph which is taken inland. So this is inland from La Hamel, and have they gone through Asnell at this point?
They're in Asnell.
Okay, so we're now looking at an aerial photograph, and I shall get a copy of this, and I will make sure that we post this up. And this is an aerial photograph which is taken at 12 noon, and we know it's taken at 12 noon because there was a record from the RAF photo reconnaissance squadron that took it.
Yes.
to say that this was taken at midday.
Correct.
And what we're looking at here is, you can see some farm buildings, you can see fields, you can see, you very helpfully marked the south orientation on it. And you've got a road coming around a corner, and on that corner are 3 DD Shermans. And you can see they're DD Shermans because you can still see the remains of the kind of skirts around the DD kind of canopy. And then you go along the end of this road, there's another junction, and you can see another Sherman tank between 2 buildings. In other words, 2 are behind, watching the lead one's backside as it sort of scouts forward. But explain to me, Jonathan, why this is significant, because I think this is really, really interesting.
We know that the first Sherwood Rangers troop off the beach of 4 tanks, the point tank was knocked out in Lahamel by an anti-tank gun, not the one on the beach, one on the crossroads, I think, with the coast road and the road that comes off the beach. And so that troop, which was the first off the beach, would at this point have been 3 tanks, not 4. And so this must be a subsequent troop coming through. And
because there's 4 of them.
Exactly.
You can see all 4 of this troop.
So which means that the first troop must have been through at 11:30ish, that type of time.
Right.
And this one's going through at 12. I mean, the other thing that I think is quite significant is that armour, when it's unsupported by infantry, has a method of advancing, particularly through close country.
Which is what this is. We've got fields, hedge,
and
lots of buildings and farms and so on.
It's that it's called a snake patrol. It sends the point vehicle quickly forward to the next bound, and gives so that it can get covering fire from the ones behind, and then it gets to the next bound, and it then looks forward and scouts out what's forward, and then when it thinks it's safe, it calls the tank behind to come up and join it,
right?
So that it can then give covering fire when the point tank then moves forward onto the next bound beyond. So it's a sort of a caterpillar type of movement called snake patrolling.
And the point is here is they are doing this on their own without infantry.
So the
question is
they've got no infantry. They wouldn't need to do that because the infantry would go forward for them if they had infantry.
So where are the infantry?
Well, we know that they are coming into Asnell at that time. We know that the 2 point battalions, that the Hampshires have turned down the coast road from the east to try and get into Lahamel.
Because rather than going along the beach,
Yes.
moving westwards along the beach towards Lahamel, they've instead got off the beach, over the dunes, onto that coast road,
Yes,
which is basically the same coast road it is today.
Yes, exactly. But they've been held up by the enemy in Lahamel and have not managed to get in from the east. And then the left-hand battalion at the Dorsets, we know that they have gone further inland and then turned east and have come round the top, and so have got into Asnell from the east.
But they don't get in till after midday, do they?
It's around about this same sort of time. So
okay.
I would expect, because they then did meet up, the Sherwood Rangers and the Devons did meet up around about midday, and then everybody joined up, and then the Sherwood Rangers.
So after midday, after
everything worked.
From about sort of 12:30 onwards
exactly.
on D-Day, it's all absolutely going fine. But what this photograph, this aerial photograph, tells you is that at midday in Asnell, their objective, the Sherwood Rangers are there, which suggests that they did land where they were supposed to have landed on Jig Green rather than Jig Red, where the infantry land, and that they've pushed inland on their own without the infantry.
Yes, correct.
Rather than turning around, going back to seawards.
In fact, when you look at the map, they're headed, their direction of travel is taking them to a little hamlet called Buho, which was their RV. when they were supposed to congregate there once they had completed their task supporting the infantry off the beach. And so it's a perfectly logical route that they were taking.
Well, this is all absolutely fascinating, and what it also tells me is that I need to leave absolutely no stone unturned on this, and I think there's a little bit more to be done on this, from oral testimonies, yes, but also from documentation, because naval documentation is also going to be key on this. But Jonathan, that's just fantastic, and it's why. A lot of history and a lot of researching is actually effectively like detective work. It's about getting little clues and piecing things together. And while it's always the kind of the human drama that kind of drew me in the first place, little kind of problems and conundrums and debates like this are really, really good fun to try and unravel. So thank you.
Indeed. And it's also the case, I find, that when you've written a piece of history and you've done the research, you almost don't mind whether anybody reads it or not, because it has been so fascinating to unearth the actual truth and the story from. So it's a very sort of personal thing, is it not?
It is, but it's also nice to sort of get
Yes.
it down in sort of hard print that. There is another. Let's face it. There's another reason for trying to get this absolutely nailed, and that is because new narratives of what happened can become set in stone, and there's a new memorial, isn't there, in Normandy?
Yes.
And we want to make sure that
Yes,
the correct story is on that memorial.
yes, for those who did it.
Yep. So I'm now at Carlton Barracks. Is that what you'd call it, Steve?
It's Carlton Drill Hall.
Carlton Drill Hall. So this is the home of the Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry, as they are now, the squadron, part of the TA. Is that right?
Part of the TA. They're a squadron of the Royal Yeomanry.
Right. So and it's a rather splendid room. I'm in the mess room here with Steve Cox, and Steve is the honorary curator, I should say. He's put a huge amount of time and effort into collating and archiving the history of the Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry. He does it all absolutely off his own bat. He is a qualified curator as well. And this room's rather splendid. You know, it's got photographs of commanding officers. There's Stanley Christopherson over there, and Donny Player, and Flash Kellett, and some of the legends from the Second World War, and they've got rows of medals all along here. I mean, I'm looking at Stanley Christopherson's medals, and Mickey Gold's, and Mitchell's, and it's amazing when you look at Christopherson's. You can see the DSO and bar, MC and bar, American Silver Star. I mean, it's pretty impressive. And you've also, over here, Steve, I'm just looking at this huge silver pot. Tell me about this one.
The silver pot was liberated from Berlin when the Sherwood Rangers got in there, and they took it from behind the backs of the Russians who were in command of the Berlin bunker.
Because it says, this cup was found in the ruins of Hitler's chancellery in Berlin by Captain Miles Hildyard. And was presented by him to the officers' mess, Nottinghamshire Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry, in July 1945. How brilliant! And there it still is, pride of place. So that's fantastic. So the reason I'm here, of course, is I'm plundering Steve's archive for what I'm doing, my Brothers in Arms book, and this really is day one in many ways, and Steve's got out photographs and stuff, and all sorts of documents, and you've got details of what vehicle was being used by who, and accounts by people and testimonies and stuff. So it's a really good collection, but I'm really intrigued by this. So this is issued fortnightly by the Army Bureau of Current Affairs. It's a little kind of white and red, little thin paper wartime issue booklet, but tell me about it, Steve. Why is this important? It's significant, I should say.
This book's called Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright, and I started reading. It's about the Battle of Roré.
Right.
And it's mentioned in Christopherson's diaries.
Yep.
That he was driving along with a reporter with him in his turret. And this was the account, but the Sherwood Rangers are not mentioned in the book.
Right, because to do so would be to reveal
secrets
and stuff, so they can't say who it is. So we have to guess, reading it, who's who.
But there are accounts in the regimental histories of what happened, so you can tie it together.
Anthony Cottrell, who's quite a famous war correspondent.
Yeah.
So here we are, yeah. So war staff writer. Part 2, the position was clear the enemy from position was. And it says, clear the enemy from Fontenay. It was now D+18. The brigade had been in action all that time and they had suffered many casualties. So this is the 8th Armoured Brigade. The colonel briefed me. So that is Christopherson. B Squadron would advance at 4:15 a.m. But it was A Squadron, wasn't it, who did the big attack at... Well, maybe not at Fontenay, because this is Fontenay, and then it's up to Rauray, isn't it?
And Rauray's involved.
But it's fascinating because, of course, this is proper reportage, isn't it?
It's done on the day when it happened.
On the day. Wonderful, kind of verbatim accounts of the kind of radio traffic he's listening to. We helped knock out a tank. It seems suicidally unresourceful. It says here, Larwood did it with a very fast one. Well, that appeals to me. So, of course, that's a reference to Harold Larwood, the legendary England fast bowler, said the squadron commander rather mysteriously. And they did like to talk in terms of cricketing references and horse riding. They were famous for that, as written up by Keith Douglas in his brilliant book that Alan and I have talked about, Alamein to Zemzem. And this is the second part, is it?
Part.
So this presumably is the Rauray bit.
And Tiger, Brain, Brat, second part.
Yeah. It's fantastic. And I've got to say, as a sort of, as a historian, coming across these little nuggets, I mean, how would you find that? I'd never have known about this had I not come up here today, Steve, and you collected it. Where did you find this in the first place?
Military Book Fair at Duxford.
And you just came across it and twigged?
There was a pile of books. And when we had Christopherson's diaries to go through, he'd actually got a copy pasted in his diary, in his notes.
Yep. How brilliant.
And I'd got that, so I thought, that's that. And I found the other part at home in my collection.
Well, I've always kind of thought, this is detective work. It's about piecing pieces together, and this is a classic example of that. I've got to say, Steve, I owe you a massive debt of thanks, because you were the one who really got underway with Stanley's diaries, transcribing them from his rather scrawling handwriting.
It wasn't done alone. There were several other people involved.
Well,
who helped,
even so.
All volunteers.
Yeah, but anyway, we were able to then use that and edit them down and get them published. And, of course, the paperback is coming out, November this year, so that's exciting. But it's really good fun. It's so exciting to get underway with the research and to see some of this material, and you've got maps, and there's a mass of photographs over there, which I'm going to have to be plundering my way through in a minute. And it really gets the whole kind of sort of research excitement juices going, I've got to say, coming up to somewhere like this. And also, there's these little museums and little archives all over the country run by volunteers and people who kind of put the time in for absolutely nothing, that ensure that so many of those stories from the Second World War and other wars, because you don't just deal with, it's the whole history of the Sherwood Rangers here, isn't it? But obviously that's my thing. You're helping to ensure that these stories survive. So, we all should be very grateful to all that you do and your fellow curators and volunteers and people who kind of work so hard to make these things happen.
Well, no museum would exist without volunteers.
Well, there you go. And particularly so now in this kind of sort of COVID time where, funding's drying up and everything. It's really important that everyone supports them as much as they possibly can. But thanks, Steve. It's great to get the ball rolling, I must say.